When parents come to me and say that they've unsuccessfully tried to drop a night feeding, the vast majority of the time, the approach that they took was to slowly reduce the number of minutes that they nursed during the night or to gradually reduce the number of ounces that they offered in the bottle during the night feeding. But then they typically report that the reason it didn't, quote, work was because their baby wasn't content after the smaller feeding, or that when they finally tried to stop offering any milk at all during the time of that waking, their baby still woke up acting hungry. This leaves parents feeling like it didn't work or their baby wasn't ready. Today, I'm going to share why I don't think that approach of gradually reducing the minutes you nurse or the ounces you offer during a feeding is the most effective for many babies. And I'll also share how I prefer to approach dropping a night feeding. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. I want to start this episode by saying that there is no evidence or science-based answer as to when a baby no longer needs night feedings. This means that your pediatrician is likely to recommend something different than, say, my pediatrician recommended. And my recommendations are likely going to differ than those of another sleep coach that you may talk to or listen to. The reality is, we are all going off of our experience, having worked with many, many babies. So, with that disclaimer in mind, my general recommendation that is not based on science whatsoever, but rather based on my experience having worked with over 1,000 babies, is that by 6 months or 16 pounds, whichever comes first, most healthy, thriving babies are ready to sleep through the night without a feeding, but many of them may need help to get there. Now, just to be clear, just because I suspect a baby is capable of sleeping through the night without any feedings, it doesn't mean that you need to drop night feedings. Each parent should drop feedings when they think it's the best time. And I want to note that I also work with a lot of babies through my Have Baby Need Sleep newborn coaching program who naturally drop feedings on their own long before 16 pounds or 6 months because we're able to help them just gradually extend that initial stretch of night sleep until the night feedings basically bump out the end of the night. This is how I helped my second daughter naturally sleep through the night when she was just 8 weeks old, which of course was long before she was 16 pounds or 6 months. So that guidance that I give doesn't mean that's when you have to force the drop. And it also doesn't mean that your baby may not be ready and capable to sleep through the night sooner. That being said, if a baby doesn't naturally drop their feedings by about 6 months, I tend to find that they are much more likely to need their parent to help them drop the feeding. I suspect that this is because, in the same way that babies develop sleep rhythms, sometimes these are good rhythms, sometimes these are not so great sleep rhythms, but in the same way that that happens, their bodies also fall into eating rhythms, meaning their body starts to send hunger cues around the same time that they eat each day, or in this case, each night. The analogy I like to give is the hunger cues that we adults may get. If you are someone who eats breakfast, lunch, and dinner around the same time each day, you will naturally get hunger cues around those times because that's when your body is accustomed to expecting food. Now, I know I'm aging myself with this example, but back in the day, there was this trend to eat small meals throughout the day. Eat a snack like every 90 minutes. They used to say it was good for us to eat like a bird. If you ever tried this recommendation and you think back on it, you will remember that then you started to get hunger cues every hour and a half or so, and that's when your body was expecting its small snack. And then, of course, now fasting is a very popular way to approach our eating. If you've ever tried to fast and let's say drop breakfast in order to extend that fast, then you know that for a few days, you probably experienced hunger cues at breakfast time if you typically ate breakfast. But then those hunger cues stopped and you were able to go throughout the morning without feeling hungry, make it to your designated time before those hunger cues showed up. I share these examples because they can really help parents understand eating rhythms and hunger cues generally, and then also understand why gradually reducing the amount of milk you offer your baby during the night may not get rid of the hunger cues that they experience during that waking. Whether you offer your baby 6, 4, or 2 ounces during the night, or you nurse for 5, 10, or 15 minutes, if they are still receiving food at that time and eating at that time has become part of their feeding rhythm, they will likely still have hunger cues when you decide to drop those final 2 ounces or the final 5 minutes of nursing. So while there is nothing wrong or harmful with gradually reducing the amount of ounces offered during a night feeding, I don't want people to be surprised if their baby still wakes and acts hungry when they try to drop the final part of that feeding. I think the most effective way to drop a night feeding for a baby who is ready is to drop one full feeding at a time. If, for example, you have a baby who's getting 2 night feedings and your goal is just to drop down to one, I would drop one full feeding. Drop the entire feeding. And maybe you adjust. So instead of one in the first part of the night and one in the second part of the night, you decide I'm going to feed once in the middle of the night, or you decide I'm just going to drop the full feeding. There are different ways to approach that. But you want to drop one full feeding. And I usually anticipate then for 2 or 3 nights that your baby may still seem hungry during their waking. And I am not saying they don't feel hungry because I suspect they do have hunger cues. But by night 4, those hunger cues should subside and their body should be adjusting to their new nighttime feeding schedule or no feeding. In my experience, dropping one full feeding at a time is the most effective way to help your baby adjust to not having that feeding. Now, what I wouldn't do is go from 3 feedings to no feedings or even 2 feedings to no feedings. Then we're going to have a pretty miserable baby. So I definitely drop one at a time and I hold for 2 or 3 nights before I'd even consider dropping the additional feedings. If you've been struggling to drop night feedings or have been trying to decide how you want to approach it, I hope this episode gave you some food for thought, pun intended. If you found this episode helpful and you haven't yet reviewed or rated the podcast, it would mean the world to me if you would take a second to do that right now. Your ratings and reviews help us continue to be able to provide this free resource to parents. Thanks in advance, and I'll see you back here next week. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.